So, the 12 Monkeys show. I watched the premiere. I have some things to say. Not very interesting or insightful things or anything, probably, but some things nonetheless. I'm gonna try to talk about this more or less spoiler free, but I'm probably gonna talk about this in the way that I assume you've seen it, because I'm really bad at this, but whatever, no one watches these anyway. So when this show was first announced, I was about as skeptical and cynical as most people. I was like, how the hell are they gonna do this? How do you expand that movie, you know? How do you get 12 Monkeys into a full show? I just didn't know how they do it, and throughout most of this episode, I kept thinking that, but I think they did convince me the other way. They did convince me they can do it in the end. Although I remain a bit skeptical, but I was actually pleasantly surprised, because this wasn't very bad. You know, it wasn't bad. It wasn't great, but it was better than I'd expected. Or I'm not entirely sure what I expected, but yeah. So what is this show? What is this episode? Well, this episode is more or less just a remake of the beginning of the movie, although, well, not quite. Well, the thing is, it kind of focuses on different. I'll get to it. The other thing I was gonna say is that I also didn't know, you know, are they gonna expand the movie, or are they gonna remake it with new actors or whatever, and that's what they did. But I also wondered, is this gonna be a remake of 12 Monkeys, or are they gonna adapt La Jetée again, or however you pronounce that? But no, it's a straight up remake of 12 Monkeys with alterations. So that's when you also get into the whole, what's the point of this? You know, why? Doesn't the movie work well enough, you know? Does it really need to be expanded into an entire show? And, you know, still, I'm like, I still don't quite see how this show could, if it could, or how it could, or why it would replace the movie, or if that's even what it's trying to do, but I don't know. But yeah, when this episode starts off as kind of a condensed version of some of the events in the movie, in the beginning, or not quite the beginning. Well, the thing is, they kind of skip ahead a bit, and it's a bit weird. But it's mostly that they focus on different parts of the movie in kind of a different order. But I suck at this. But yeah, what they do is with the part where I can't remember the names. The Bruce Willis character, of course not played by Bruce Willis anymore, goes back and he encounters the doctor lady at the lecture, and he talks to her about. And it's been a while since I saw the movie, so I'm still a bit fuzzy on some of the details of exactly how things went down there. But they really did follow a lot of the same cues. You know, she gets in the car and he's in the back seat and he's like, "No, I'm not trying to rob you. I'm from the future," and she's confused and all that stuff. But it's basically that part of the movie, and then it skips ahead to the part where they're at the. Or actually, I'm not sure if that might actually be where it kind of goes, because eventually this episode just goes in a completely different direction, because they don't show a lot of like the future. They just go into a bit of a flashback. They kind of explain the past for the future, like the backstory for what with the time travel, and I guess they fleshed that out a bit more than in the movie. In the movie, it was kind of a bit vague and fuzzy, but I kind of like that. But, you know, this one is a bit more kind of straightforward. It's like, oh, this is what happened, this is what we're trying to do. And they just kind of showed a bit of the future and him being sent back, and yeah. But they didn't really focus on that as much. And they didn't show the parts where they send him to the wrong time, like when he goes to World War I, or when he goes to the asylum with the Brad Pitt character. All of that stuff is completely gone. So it's a lot more focused right now. And from what I gather, what they're gonna do is that they're probably gonna do the different parts of the movie that were a bit more kind of intercut or jumbled up or whatever, even though they weren't really. I mean, he was in asylum first, and then he was with the. So there was, it was pretty. The movie was more or less linear, but I guess it was just a bit more. I don't know. The movie, the show, the episode is more to the point, I guess. This thing, it kind of goes in there and it focuses on this plot line right away, and then let's see where it goes. But the ending of this episode really kind of diverged a fair bit from the movie. There wasn't really anything from the movie, if I recall correctly. I don't really know. I said the Brad Pitt's character doesn't like appear at all. All that stuff is gone. The asylum bit and all that is like, yeah. But I really get the feeling that they're gonna get to that later, because where this one diverged the most towards the end was that in the movie you had this thing where they had kind of all this information that they wanted, and they sent Bruce Willis back in time, and then the story mostly followed his timeline in one go, coherently from his perspective. It was all just kind of one big thing after they had all this this information stuff that they needed. I mean, it was still fragmented information, but it was. But in this show, what they seem to have done is that they don't have a lot of the information that you had at the beginning of the movie. Like the stuff with the 12 monkeys, although actually I'm not entirely sure if they had that from the beginning of the movie. So my memory is a bit fuzzy. But what I gather, what they're going to do is that they're going to like rearrange the bits of the backstory in the movie and kind of intersperse that with like in okay, I'm kind of confusing myself and really feel like I'm rambling, but again, trying to make this even clearer. In the movie, it's like you have the backstory and then there's the story, and in the show, it's like this beginning of this episode is like way back here, and then the backstory from the movie is probably gonna fill a gap, and then they're gonna get back to the movie and go a bit more back and forth. That's the impression I'm getting. Although, of course, as of yet, I have no idea where they're gonna go with this. But that's what I think they're gonna do, and they're probably gonna explore more of the movie's backstory. That in this one is not gonna be backstory, but part of the main story. It gets confusing. It doesn't help that time travel plots can get kind of confusing in the first place, but whatever. I probably don't need to talk about that. I think I've made myself clear more or less, or probably not, but I think I've talked about that as much as I should in any case. But so yes, so let's focus on some of the other elements where it kind of differs. And one of the things that I thought of right away is that in the movie they make it absolutely clear that the whole thing is this predestination thing. You cannot change the past. The time travel is like it's a predestination time travel kind of movie. It's you see in the beginning of the movie, the ending of the movie, and from a different perspective, and it's travel back in time and cause the events and all that stuff. It's a predestination movie. You can't change the past. That's how it works. In this one, it's a bit more confusing, and by confusing I mean inconsistent, because some parts of it are very much predestination things. Because there was something, I can't quite remember, but there was like a thing where the doctor lady was talking about the main character, Cole is his name, like in the future, in her future, but in their past. So we're probably gonna get to those events eventually, and that's probably gonna be like predestinatory, whatever you call it. But then there were other things that were also just really kind of weird how they were done, and just not very logical from a time traveling perspective. But I don't know, I guess if you go with the kind of alternate reality route of time travel, yeah. But there was stuff where where Cole had the doctor ladies. I'm sorry, I can't remember her names. Riley. He had Riley's watch that he took from the future, and she had it with her. And like to prove that he was from the future, he cut into her watch in the past, and then there was like a cut on the one from the future formed, like at the same time in the past from the future, and that's just kind of like, well, you know, if it was a predestination thing, shouldn't it have been there from the start? Because it's the future. You know, he took the future. He even if he cut it in the past, it would still be in the future. Whatever. But the fact that it would also just show up on the future object when you alter the past, and you know, like there are flashing lights and shit where it's kind of like, oh man, the walls of reality are breaking down. That's all just kind of a bit weird. It's a bit too sci-fi, a bit not very logical, but I can deal with that. But again, it's just a bit confusing because there are still elements, and I'm sorry that I forget some of the more exact examples, but there are still parts of this movie that make it clear that it's a predestination thing. Like there's a part where a character talks to Cole and it's like, I met you in 87, and Cole's like, I've never been to 87, so it's like, oh, next episode they're going to 87, or at some point in the series they're gonna go to 87 and explore that, and that's why I also figured that they're probably gonna explore the backstory of the movie in different order, as I said before, in that they kind of hinted on that there's gonna be more stuff, and you know, of course, the Repri character is gonna show up and play a part and everything. So you know, that's gonna be later. It's gonna be explored later. But I guess my only criticism, really, that I made way too long was that the movie made it really clear how the time travel worked. Or, well, of course, it didn't make it clear like how the actual process of but you know, the timeline, how that worked. And of course, it spent more time kind of in the future, showing a bit more of that, although it was all very kind of cryptic and Gilliam-esque, but you know, what do you expect? And speaking of the future and Gilliam, that leads me to the next part, in that this show is very ugly in comparison. Or not ugly, but it's just not quite as attractive. But I mean, what do you expect? You have a movie made by Terry Gilliam, who's just a brilliant director and a very visual director with a very distinct visual style. And, you know, his vision of the future and everything, it was all very out there and explored, and, you know, it's good. I mean, you've seen the movie. If you haven't seen the movie, go watch the movie. It's a great fucking movie. In this one, it just kind of looked like any other apocalypse, you know? It looked like any of the millions of zombie shows and games or whatever out there, minus the zombies, but it's just kind of like, oh, you know, oh, it's future, and it's oh, okay, everything's kind of gone to shit. The human version made it just, it was damn good looking, basically, honestly. And another just kind of small nitpicky thing, but something I still kind of picked up when I was watching, is that in the movie they did this thing where like when you time travel you're naked because they can only like do organic matter or whatever. At least I'm pretty sure. So if I remember correctly, they're naked, kind of like in the Terminator. In this one, he just kind of time travels about fully clothed and shit, and just the way they made the time travel machine look, I just feel like that did not. I didn't like the design, you know, and I guess that's kind of what it ties in, that even when in the pictures of the future and everything, when it looked kind of similar, I didn't really like the design that much of some things, like the time travel machine and everything, and that was when it's kind of like, it's just like these two cylinders, and it's like blue light on Cole, and he sits in a chair, and then he disappears. And I was like, how does that work? You know, it's like, okay, it's a time travel, it's the MacGuffin, it's the phlebotomy, whatever you call it in TV tropes terms. It's like, okay, we don't have to care about the science of time travel. But, again, he just sits in this chair, and they have the blue light on the chair and everything, and on him, and he disappears with his clothes. And I'm like, well, how did they know to travel him back in time, but not the chair? You know, if it only did organic matter or whatever, it could be like, you know, okay, if he was naked, I could kind of buy that, because then it's, you know, that kind of thing that shows up in quite a lot of fiction. It's like, oh, they only know. And I know that isn't really any more scientific, but that would still kind of explain. But this one, I guess that was just kind of a bit of a nitpick. Like, how did they transport him but not the chair? I don't know. But the other thing I was thinking of, when it comes to Gilliam and remaking and what's the point and all that, updating the story, because again, the movie did the episode did kind of convince me that it was worthwhile to stick around. I'm gonna watch the next episode, you know, and I'm gonna keep on going for now. You know, it did manage to convince me in the end that they're gonna do something new with this and something different, and it's not just gonna be a rehash, which was what I feared. But what I was also gonna think was, are they gonna update it? You know, update it more modern age, you know, more current, more 2015, you know? And they really kind of didn't, which kind of surprised me. And that's not necessarily a negative, because a lot of the time when you update something, it's like, oh no, it's the same, but it's current, it's contemporary, is that you often have a tendency to date it a lot more, where, you know, if you make a very concentrated effort to make something current, well, it's not gonna stay current, then it's gonna be, you know, if you take a timeless movie and update it, it's not gonna be timeless anymore, then it's gonna be the updated version that's gonna be outdated later on. So they didn't really do that with this one, which was what I feared a bit, but at the same time, I'm kind of surprised, but I'm not entirely sure if, because there are some things where you can update, of course, and it's not necessarily gonna date it horrendously. But yeah, I was a bit surprised, confused, because there's because of course in the backstory, or in the forward story, or whatever, you know, in the backstory to the future, between the present and the future, a plague swipes the earth and kills almost everyone, except for some immune people in this one. I don't know if they were immune in the original, because in the original they couldn't go up to the surface, which also was more interesting, you know, design-wise and everything with those elements. They couldn't go to the surface. In this one, they seem to have no problem being on the surface, but I guess it's only the immune people, and they didn't really explain how the immunity works. If, like, are there only immune people still around in the future? Is immunity is the immunity genetic? Like, do children of immune parents, are they also immune? Because with all that kind of stuff, there was also a criticism I had, where where the incentive to send someone back in time just wasn't quite the same. Because in the movie they really show that no one can survive on the Earth. You know, they send Bruce Willis up, and he has like all this protective gear and everything. They send him up to the surface, and you know, it's just the animals and everything, and you can't survive there. Everyone has to live underground. In this one, they walk around on the surface just fine, because they're immune, I guess. And that's why I also wondered, well, if everyone's immune in the future, you know, or if it is genetic or whatever, if all the immune people, if the immune people were the ones who survived and their children are immune, but again, they didn't explain that, maybe they're not, but I guess I just mean that they should have made more, explained that better. Do you really need to send someone back in time, you know? Couldn't you just, if by the time everyone is immune, can't you just go out into the world again and rebuild and reclaim, you know? Do you really need to send someone back in time? I mean, of course, it'd be cool if you could avert the disaster, but in the movie, that was the only thing they could do. Because there was just, they couldn't go on the surface, there was nothing they could do, they couldn't rebuild. I think they were like, kind of being overpopulated down in the underground or whatever. And And the time travel option was the only option they had. In this one, they just kind of didn't really sell me as much on this being necessary, I guess was my criticism. But the other thing I was talking about the updating and the contemporary was, I mean, lately there's been quite a lot of disease scare, you know, and even with kind of chemical and biological weapons and whatnot. You know, of course, last year the whole Ebola thing, which is still kind of ongoing. You know, this episode, it didn't mention Ebola at all. You know, and that was just kind of a bit like, are they gonna bring up these current things? You know, and I don't know. This was probably in production before the Ebola thing, although I can't really remember when the Ebola thing started. But you know, stuff like that, where it's like, well, if you're not really gonna, because they didn't really do anything with that, with the more modern kind of use on these things. Because the movie was made in '96, if I'm not mistaken, or at least in the '90s, and you know, the world's kind of changed a fair bit since then in how we view, you know, disease and epidemics and medicine, science, and all that kind of stuff. But they didn't really do much with that, and for bad or for good, as I said, that might just date the show, but that also makes me wonder, what's the point in updating this? Do we just want to kind of watch the same story with new actors, whatever? I don't know. But yeah, still not entirely sure if I was going anywhere with that, but that was a thing that I noticed, paid attention to, wanted to criticize, I guess. I mean, I get all these ideas in my head, but then I try to express them and I just ramble on like this. So, I don't know. I have no order. But I think that was about it. And yeah, but as I said before, they did ultimately sell me, and I'm gonna watch the next episode, and maybe I'll do a vlog about that too. I don't know. I mean, these you know, ongoing episode by episode vlogs are kind of a trend right now. Maybe I should be the up-to-date contemporary to be updated. I don't know. But that basically, in the end, all I can say is, we'll see where it goes from here. You know, I had some criticisms, some nitpicks, some just kind of curious ponderings about the premiere, but with a television show, you never know how valid those are going to be in the future. So, all I can really say is, we'll see where it goes from here. Maybe we'll get back to this, maybe I'll do a vlog, an episode. I don't know. That was about it. So, see you later. Maybe, I guess. Who knows?